Early morning jogs had always been my escape, a routine that brought clarity before the chaos of the day set in. The park was my haven, a sprawling green space filled with winding trails, tall trees, and the soft sounds of nature awakening. Each step was a rhythmic meditation, the soft crunch of gravel beneath my sneakers harmonizing with the rustling leaves above. I set out on my usual route, the familiar path guiding me past the glistening pond and under the arching branches of ancient oaks. The air was crisp, invigorating as I inhaled deeply, allowing the scent of damp earth and fresh grass to fill my lungs. The early morning light filtered through the trees, casting dappled patterns on the ground, creating a serene atmosphere that always put me at ease. As I rounded a bend, I noticed a figure in the distance. At first, they were merely a silhouette against the rising sun, but as I drew closer, I could make out a man standing still on the path, his posture rigid and watchful. He was dressed in dark clothing, his hands stuffed into his pockets, seemingly lost in thought. I felt a slight hitch in my stride, but brushed it off, convincing myself it was just another park-goer enjoying the early hours. I continued my jog, the sound of my breathing and the steady beat of my heart filling my ears. I passed the man without a second glance, focusing on the rhythm of my feet against the ground. But as I moved further along the path, I couldn't shake the sensation that I was being watched. I glanced over my shoulder, and to my surprise, I saw him still standing there, eyes fixed on me, an unyielding gaze that sent a shiver down my spine. I quickened my pace, the familiar trail transforming into a gauntlet. The man didn't move. He remained at his post, an unmoving sentinel against the vibrant backdrop of the park. I tried to dismiss the unease creeping into my mind, reminding myself that I had jogged this route countless times without incident. Yet each footfall felt heavier, the serenity of the park giving way to an unsettling undercurrent. I turned onto another trail, hoping to lose the feeling of being pursued, but as I navigated the winding path, I could still sense his presence. I didn't dare look back again. I focused on the ground ahead, counting my breaths and pushing my legs to maintain a steady pace. The sounds of chirping birds and rustling leaves that usually calmed me now seemed distant, drowned out by the pounding of my heart. A sudden rustle in the bushes nearby made me jump, adrenaline surging through me as I glanced toward the sound. A small rabbit darted into the underbrush, but my pulse raced as I realized that the man had begun to follow me. He moved with an unsettling quietness, his figure blending into the shadows of the trees as he trailed behind at a distance, watching intently. I increased my speed, my mind racing with options. Should I confront him, or was it better to keep moving? Panic began to seep into my thoughts, overriding my instincts. The peaceful park had morphed into a labyrinth of anxiety, and every twist and turn felt like a potential trap. I could see the path stretching ahead, leading deeper into the woods, where the light faded and shadows grew longer. As I continued, I spotted a small group of joggers in the distance, their laughter echoing through the trees. A flicker of hope surged within me, and I focused on reaching them. Perhaps safety was just a few moments away. I pressed on, urging my legs to move faster, but the man was persistent. With every glance over my shoulder, I saw him gaining ground, his expression unreadable as he closed the distance between us. The laughter of the other joggers grew louder, and I pushed myself harder, desperate to reach them. As I neared the group, relief flooded me like a wave. I could see their vibrant attire, the friendly gestures, and felt the warmth of community beckoning. I had to warn them, to let them know. I stumbled into their midst, my breath coming in frantic gasps, eyes darting back to where I had come from. The man had stopped, lingering just out of sight behind a cluster of trees, his figure concealed among the shadows. I pointed in his direction, struggling to find my voice amidst the chaos of my thoughts. But the joggers merely smiled, assuming I was breathless from my exertion. They offered encouraging words and invited me to join them, a welcoming distraction from the anxiety that still gripped my chest. I hesitated, glancing back toward the woods, expecting to see the man emerging from the shadows. Yet he remained hidden, just beyond the tree line, watching from a distance. Despite my fear, I joined their group, allowing their conversation to envelop me. Together, we continued along the path, the camaraderie slowly dissolving my apprehension. As we jogged on, I glanced back one last time, but the figure had vanished. The shadows of the trees no longer felt suffocating. They had transformed into a place of refuge. We reached the edge of the park, the sun fully risen now, casting a golden glow over the world around us. The warmth seeped into my bones, filling the void left by the chilling experience. I had escaped, at least for now, but I knew I would remain vigilant, aware that the sanctuary I had cherished could quickly shift into a space of uncertainty. The park would still be my escape, but it would carry the weight of my encounter, a reminder that safety is often an illusion, easily shattered by the presence of those who lurk in the shadows. I had just settled down for the night, ready to dive into my latest series. The room was dimly lit, casting shadows across the walls, and the only sound was the soft hum of my laptop. I pulled a blanket over my legs and sipped my coffee, relaxing into the familiar comfort of my routine. Suddenly, a strange noise pierced the tranquility outside. It was a low, vibrating hum that seemed to vibrate through the walls and resonate in my chest. I paused, looking around as the sound grew louder, its source unclear. Dismissing it as the wind or perhaps a passing vehicle, I returned my focus to the screen, but the noise persisted, creeping under my skin like an unwelcome chill. I pulled back the curtain, heart racing, and peered outside, my pulse quickening as I scanned the dark street. Nothing was there, just the quiet of the night and the empty road. I shook my head, trying to shake off the unease that clung to me. A few minutes later, the humming escalated, becoming a discordant melody that sent a shiver down my spine. I grabbed my phone, trying to distract myself by scrolling through social media. Just as I began to relax again, I caught a glimpse of movement outside the window. I whipped around, and there it was, a figure tall and elongated, its skin shimmering under the moonlight. Fear rooted me to the spot as I stared at the creature, trying to make sense of its form. It stood with an unnatural grace, its features indistinct but strangely compelling. The large, dark eyes reflected the moonlight, and I felt a dizzying pull, as if those eyes were drawing me in. I wanted to look away, to escape the suffocating curiosity it inspired, but I couldn't move. I turned off the lights, hoping to conceal my presence, retreating to the far corner of the room. My heart pounded in my chest, and I gripped the edge of the sofa, trying to steady myself. The hum outside grew louder, resonating through the walls, vibrating my bones. I could hear something scraping against the window like nails on glass. Holding my breath, I peeked through the curtain again, but the figure was gone. I released a shaky breath, my mind racing. Had I imagined it? I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the light or my overactive imagination. But the feeling of dread lingered, heavy and thick in the quiet room. I grabbed my phone to call someone, but the screen flickered and went dark. I tapped the power button repeatedly, but it wouldn't respond. Panic surged through me as I glanced back at the window. My heart skipped a beat as I saw the creature there, closer than before. Its expression unreadable. It seemed to move with a fluidity that defied logic, gliding silently along the edge of the glass. I pressed myself against the wall, desperate to remain hidden, my mind racing with thoughts of escape. Just then a loud thud echoed outside, followed by a shattering sound that sent my heart into my throat. The creature's form warped and shimmered, blending into the shadows. I couldn't tell if it was real or just a figment of my imagination. In a desperate attempt to protect myself, I grabbed a lamp and held it tightly, ready to defend myself against whatever was coming. The noise stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that filled the room. I could barely breathe, fear coursing through my veins like ice. I waited, tense, for any sign of movement. The stillness stretched on, and I dared to take a shaky breath, half hoping it was all over. Then, just when I thought I might be safe, the hum returned. Closer this time, wrapping around me like a blanket. I felt a strange pull, as if it wanted me to step closer to the window, to give in to whatever was waiting outside. The sensation was overwhelming, a mix of fear and curiosity. I couldn't resist it any longer. I stepped toward the window, driven by an inexplicable force. But just as I reached for the curtain, the creature vanished, leaving only the quiet night behind. My heart raced as I stumbled back, the realization washing over me. I was completely alone, trapped in my own home with a lingering dread that something unseen still lurked in the darkness. The fluorescent lights buzzed above as I stepped into the supermarket, the familiar scent of fresh produce mingling with the aroma of baked goods. My cart glided smoothly along the polished floor, and I let out a small sigh of relief. It was a Saturday afternoon and the store was busy, but the chatter and laughter of fellow shoppers usually brought me comfort. Today, however, that comfort felt distant. I grabbed a few essentials, milk, bread, and a couple of snacks for the week, while keeping an eye on the clock. I wanted to be quick about it. The earlier I finished, the sooner I could return to the comfort of my home. As I turned down the aisle, I caught sight of a man standing at the end, his posture rigid, a shopping list clutched tightly in his hand. He seemed ordinary enough, yet something in the way he stared at me made my skin crawl. I tried to brush it off, reminding myself that many people had odd habits, especially in public places. I pushed my cart forward, concentrating on the items in front of me, but a fleeting glance over my shoulder revealed he was still there, watching. I changed direction, heading toward the dairy section. The sound of my cart wheels rolling over the tiles filled the silence. I picked up a carton of eggs, forcing myself to focus on my shopping. But each time I turned a corner, I noticed him lingering further down the aisle, always just out of reach. His eyes locked onto me. A wave of discomfort washed over me, and I picked up my pace, glancing around the store. Most shoppers were oblivious, lost in their own worlds, but I couldn't shake the sensation of being pursued. I hurried to the produce section, filling my cart with fruits and vegetables, hoping to blend in with the crowd. But no matter where I went, he followed. At the checkout, I positioned myself in front of a long line of customers, stealing quick glances back toward the entrance. He stood there just inside the doors, his expression unreadable, scanning the aisles with an unnerving intensity. I felt exposed, trapped in the bright light of the supermarket, and my heart raced. As my turn approached, I tried to concentrate on the cashier, forcing a smile as I began unloading my items. My fingers trembled slightly as I placed each product on the counter. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him moving closer, weaving through the lines, his gaze fixed on me. Panic surged within me as I quickly paid for my groceries, feeling the weight of his attention. With my bags in hand, I rushed toward the exit, the chatter of other customers fading into the background. I glanced back one last time and froze. He was gone, having disappeared into the throngs of people milling about the store. I took a deep breath, relieved, but my sense of security wavered. As I stepped outside, the sunlight hit me like a wave, momentarily blinding me. I hurried to my car, fumbling with the keys as anxiety knotted my stomach. I tossed my bags into the passenger seat and climbed in, locking the doors behind me. I sat for a moment, heart pounding, breathing heavily. Just as I began to calm down, I glanced in the rearview mirror. My breath caught in my throat as I saw him standing near the entrance, staring directly at me. The shadow of uncertainty enveloped me once more, and I felt a surge of adrenaline as I started the engine and pulled away from the parking lot. I drove home, my mind racing. The image of his intense gaze burned into my thoughts. The familiar streets felt foreign, and every car that passed made my pulse quicken. I fought to push the incident from my mind, assuring myself it was nothing, just a coincidence. But as I finally reached my apartment and closed the door behind me, I couldn't shake the feeling that he had been watching me, waiting for an opportunity. That night, I locked all the windows and drew the curtains tightly. The comforting sounds of my neighborhood faded into silence, leaving me with an unsettling sense of vigilance. I vowed to never visit that supermarket alone again, acutely aware that sometimes danger hides behind the most ordinary facades. The cruise ship swayed gently as it cut through the turquoise waters, a floating paradise brimming with laughter and sunlight. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden hue across the deck as I mingled with other passengers, indulging in the blissful atmosphere of vacation. I wandered from the pool area to the dining hall, sampling delicacies from all corners of the world. Each moment was a celebration, and I immersed myself in the joy of escape. As dusk approached, I decided to explore the ship further. The corridors were lined with vibrant artwork, and I was captivated by the shimmering reflections of the ocean outside the large windows. I lost track of time, wandering through the labyrinthine hallways, peeking into lounges filled with laughter and music. However, as night fell, the atmosphere shifted. The once bustling corridors grew quieter, and I felt a chill creep up my spine. I turned down a long hallway, its dim lighting casting long shadows that flickered ominously. The vibrant colors of the ship's decor dulled under the harsh fluorescent lights, and I found myself instinctively looking over my shoulder. There, at the far end of the hall, I noticed a figure standing motionless, wrapped in a dark coat that seemed out of place amidst the cheerful ambiance of the ship. The person appeared to be watching me intently. I hesitated, my curiosity battling with an instinctive urge to retreat. There was an unsettling aura surrounding the figure, as if they belonged to another world entirely. I continued down the hallway, determined to shake off the disquieting sensation. The ship felt different now, its once welcoming embrace transforming into a chilling confinement. As I turned another corner, I realized the figure had vanished, replaced by a thick silence that enveloped the corridor. My heart raced as I pushed on, desperate to escape the growing anxiety. Reaching the deck, I was met by the refreshing sea breeze, which offered little comfort. I leaned against the railing, staring out into the abyss of dark water, hoping to find clarity. The waves lapped gently against the hull, yet the vastness of the ocean felt menacing, as if hiding secrets just below the surface. Suddenly the ship jolted, a deep rumble reverberating through the metal framework. I gripped the railing tighter, scanning the surroundings for an explanation. Other passengers looked equally bewildered, glancing around in confusion. It felt as if the ship itself had awakened, shifting into a different reality. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of the figure again, lurking just beyond the edge of the deck. Its presence loomed ominously in the shadows, and I could feel its gaze piercing through the dim light. I turned, my pulse quickening, but when I looked back, it had retreated into the darkness. My instincts screamed for me to leave the deck, but curiosity and dread pulled me deeper into the night. I decided to venture to the lower decks, hoping to find a familiar space to ground myself. Each step I took echoed in the silence, amplifying my growing unease. The lower levels of the ship felt claustrophobic, the walls closing in around me as I navigated the narrow passageways. As I wandered, I noticed doors marked with strange symbols, their significance lost on me. I pressed forward, drawn by an invisible force that urged me to explore. It was then that I heard it, a faint sound, like whispers swirling through the hallways. I strained to listen, but the words were indistinguishable, layered with an unsettling urgency. Suddenly a door creaked open nearby, and my heart raced. I paused, breath hitching in my throat, as I caught sight of a flickering light spilling from the room. My curiosity piqued. I approached cautiously. As I peered inside, the flickering revealed a makeshift gathering of passengers, all huddled together, their faces pale with fear. They gestured frantically for me to join them, their eyes wide with terror. I stepped inside, desperate to understand what was happening. They spoke of a presence that stalked the ship, a figure that appeared in dreams and reality, whispering promises and threats. Each account echoed with the same chilling theme, a relentless pursuit that seemed to stem from the ship itself. Just as I began to comprehend the gravity of the situation, the lights flickered violently, plunging us into darkness. Panic erupted among the group as we stumbled to find a way out. I pressed through the throng, pushing open the door, and ran down the hallway, heart pounding. As I navigated the dimly lit passageways, I felt the weight of 1,000 eyes upon me. The whispers grew louder, morphing into a chaotic cacophony that filled my mind with dread. I raced toward the nearest staircase, desperate to escape the madness that had engulfed the ship. I finally burst onto the main deck, the cool night air hitting me like a wave. But the atmosphere had shifted drastically. The once cheerful laughter was replaced by an eerie silence, punctuated only by the sound of the ocean crashing against the hull. I looked around, feeling utterly alone, as if the ship had swallowed everyone else whole. In the distance, I spotted the figure once more, standing at the ship's edge, staring into the void. My heart pounded as I realized the truth. The ship had become a vessel for something sinister, and the figure was a harbinger of the terror that awaited anyone who lingered too long. I turned to run, not stopping until I reached my cabin, slamming the door behind me. I locked it tight, the weight of fear pressing down on me. I could still hear the whispers seeping through the walls, echoing the promise of what lay beneath the waves. No longer was I on a relaxing cruise. I was trapped in a nightmare, with no escape from the shadows lurking just beyond my reach. I had lived in my small apartment for nearly a year, a cozy space that felt like a refuge from the world outside. The walls were adorned with pictures of friends and family, and the familiar creaks and groans of the old building lulled me into a sense of comfort. My evenings often consisted of curling up with a good book or binge-watching shows, oblivious to the life unfolding beyond my windows. One evening, as I prepared dinner, I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. I paused, wiping my hands on a towel, and turned to the window. Across the way, in the adjacent building, a figure stood in the dim light of an apartment. The silhouette was striking. A man with an angular frame who seemed to watch me intently. I felt an unexpected jolt of unease as our gazes met, but I quickly dismissed it, attributing it to my imagination. The next few days passed, and the man became a recurring presence in my peripheral vision. I would see him standing in the window at various times, always watching. At first, I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was simply a coincidence. Yet, the way he lingered, often in the shadows, gnawed at me. I could feel his eyes on me even when I turned away, as if he were assessing my every move. I began to alter my routine, closing the curtains whenever I felt his gaze. I could hardly focus on my evening activities, the weight of his attention growing heavier with each passing day. The warmth of my apartment dimmed, overshadowed by the unsettling sensation of being scrutinized. One night I decided to confront my fear. I opened the curtain slightly and peered through the window, the streetlights casting a faint glow across the room. The man stood there again, his face obscured by the shadows. It was unnerving, a quiet intensity radiating from him, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. I quickly retreated, heart racing, uncertain of what to do. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself avoiding the window altogether. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I began to question my own sanity, wondering if I was imagining the whole thing. But every time I caught a glimpse of him, that familiar chill would creep in, a reminder that he was very much real. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was simply a neighbor with too much time on his hands, or perhaps he was waiting for someone in his life. But no matter how much I tried to dismiss my discomfort, the unease settled deep within me like a weight that would not budge. Then, one night, I noticed something strange. The light in his apartment flickered as if a shadow had crossed it, and he vanished. I waited, heart pounding, but the minutes turned into hours and I grew anxious. The absence of his figure only heightened my sense of dread. I felt as though the very fabric of my existence was unraveling and I was left in a void. Sleep eluded me that night. I tossed and turned, replaying every encounter in my mind, desperately trying to piece together the puzzle of his existence. Had he been watching me the entire time? Did he know me better than I knew myself? I could feel a thread connecting us, a tension that hung heavily in the air. The next day, I gathered the courage to leave my apartment, determined to distract myself. I went for a long walk, trying to shake off the anxiety that had settled in my bones. But when I returned home, the first thing I did was look toward the window. To my surprise, the man was back, standing in the same spot as always. I felt a rush of anger mixed with fear, my heart pounding as I confronted him from afar. I decided to report my suspicions to the building manager, hoping to find some clarity. As I explained my feelings, I noticed the manager's expression shift. There was a flicker of recognition in her eyes, but she quickly masked it. She assured me that everything was fine, but her tone suggested otherwise. I left her office with more questions than answers, wondering what secrets the building held. That night, I resolved to keep my curtains closed and avoid the window entirely. I pushed the sofa against the glass, creating a barrier between me and the outside world. I could hear the muffled sounds of the city below, but I focused on drowning them out with music. As the days turned into weeks, the man continued to haunt my thoughts. I often found myself glancing at the window, half expecting to see him there. But I could never summon the courage to open the curtains. I felt like a prisoner in my own home, confined by my fears. Then, one fateful evening, as I sat on the couch with my back to the window, a loud bang jolted me upright. I turned, heart racing, and saw a flash of movement outside. I sprang up and pulled the curtain aside. To my shock, the man was standing on my balcony, face illuminated by the moonlight, his eyes locked onto mine. Panic surged through me, a primal instinct to flee. I stumbled backward, adrenaline coursing through my veins as I scrambled for my phone. The room spun around me, and I felt dizzy with terror. I hit the speed dial for the police, my hands shaking uncontrollably. As I waited for them to arrive, I pressed myself against the far wall, trying to catch my breath. I could hear the sound of my own heart pounding in my ears, drowning out everything else. And then, there was silence. an unsettling stillness that blanketed the room. When the police finally arrived, they found nothing. The balcony was empty, and there were no signs of forced entry. I could feel their skepticism, the weight of my fear dismissed as paranoia. They assured me they would keep an eye on the building, but their reassurance did little to quell the dread that had taken root in my mind. That night I lay wide awake, the curtains drawn tight, the room plunged into darkness. I could hear the faint hum of the city outside, but it felt distant, as if I were trapped in a bubble of fear. I knew I couldn't stay in the apartment any longer. I had to escape the haunting presence that had invaded my life. The next morning I packed my things, determined to leave the nightmare behind. As I loaded my belongings into the car, I cast one final glance at the building. For a fleeting moment, I thought I saw him watching me from the window. That same unsettling gaze piercing through the distance. I drove away, leaving my old life behind, but the memories of those chilling encounters lingered. The sense of being watched, the feeling of dread. It would forever haunt me, a ghost of the apartment that once felt like home. It was a quiet Tuesday evening when I finished my shift at the diner. The neon lights flickered outside, casting a flickering glow on the damp pavement as I stepped into my car. The world seemed tranquil, but I couldn't shake the weariness that had settled into my bones after a long day. I slid into the driver's seat and took a deep breath, eager to escape the tired atmosphere of the restaurant. As I drove through the nearly deserted streets, the familiar route to my apartment felt oddly lonely. Street lights illuminated the road, but the shadows stretched and twisted, making the surroundings appear alive. I turned up the radio, hoping to drown out my thoughts, but the static crackled with an unsettling energy that only heightened my unease. Halfway through my journey, I caught a glimpse of something in the rearview mirror, a flicker of movement. I glanced back, expecting to see a car following me, but the back seat was empty. Shaking off the feeling, I continued driving, trying to brush aside the uneasiness that lingered like a whisper in my mind. Moments later, a shiver coursed through me as I turned a corner. The darkness of the street seemed to close in around the car, and I fought the urge to glance back again. Just as I was about to convince myself it was all in my head, a sudden chill swept through the vehicle, causing the hairs on my arms to stand on end. I hesitated, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. The road stretched ahead, but the feeling of being observed began to tighten its grip on my chest. I flicked the rearview mirror again, and my heart dropped as I noticed a figure sitting quietly in the back seat. Panic surged through me as I fought to focus on the road. The figure was shrouded in shadow, their features obscured, but I could feel their presence pressing in around me. I glanced back for a fleeting second, heart racing, but the instant I turned, they seemed to vanish into the darkness. Every muscle in my body tensed as I pushed the accelerator, desperate to escape whatever had slipped into my car. The streetlights rushed by, blurring into streaks of light, but the feeling of dread clung to me like a heavy fog. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just a trick of the light or my imagination. But as I glanced back again, the figure was there. Closer this time, the outline more defined. My thoughts raced. I could not allow fear to take control. I needed to reach a public place, somewhere crowded where I would be safe. The thought of being trapped in this metal box with an unknown presence sent my heart into a frenzy. I took a sharp turn, my mind racing with options for a nearby gas station or a well-lit street. The headlights of oncoming cars illuminated the figure briefly, and for a moment I caught a glimpse of something. Eyes that bore into me, dark and unfathomable. A chill ran down my spine as I forced myself to look away, focusing on the road ahead. The darkness seemed to thicken around the edges of my vision, the shadows stretching like fingers toward me. With every passing moment, I could feel the weight of the presence in the back seat. I needed to know if it was real or just a figment of my exhausted mind. I reached for my phone, wanting to call someone, but as I glanced down to grab it, a sense of urgency pulled at me, demanding my attention back to the road. Then came the sound, a soft rustle behind me, the shift of fabric, as if someone was adjusting their position. My heart raced faster and I fought the urge to scream. The road began to blur and my vision narrowed. I needed to stay calm, to keep control of the vehicle. I squeezed my eyes shut for a moment, taking a deep breath, and when I opened them again, the streetlights flickered as I turned onto a busier road. The noise of the city enveloped me and I felt a flicker of hope. I was almost there, just a few more blocks. My heart still raced, but I could see the glow of storefronts and the movement of people in the distance. I could escape this nightmare, but just as I began to relax, a sudden realization struck me. I had not seen the figure move. The uncertainty sank in deeper. I glanced in the rearview mirror once more, and this time dread consumed me. The figure was closer, their face shrouded in shadows but unmistakably there, still watching, their presence more oppressive than ever. I fought against the rising panic, my hands gripping the steering wheel with a vice-like intensity. I sped up, weaving through traffic, desperation coursing through my veins. The city lights blurred into streaks as I made a series of sharp turns, my eyes darting between the road and the mirror. Then, out of nowhere, the figure shifted again, inching forward in the seat. I could feel their gaze piercing through me, and I fought the urge to scream. The world around me became a blur, the noise of the city fading as I locked eyes with the darkness in the back seat. I pressed my foot harder on the accelerator, adrenaline pumping through my veins as I careened around a corner. I could see the outline of a diner ahead, its bright lights flickering like a beacon of safety. Just as I was about to reach it, a deafening crash resonated through the car, and everything went black. When I finally opened my eyes, I was in the driver's seat, the car crumpled against a lamppost. My heart raced as I looked around, dazed. The back seat was empty. A wave of confusion washed over me, and I struggled to comprehend what had happened. I stumbled out of the wreckage, heart pounding as I searched for any sign of the figure, but they were gone. The commotion of onlookers began to surround me, and as I tried to piece together the fragments of what just occurred, I realized that I was free from that sinister presence. Yet, deep down, a nagging thought lingered. Was it truly gone, or had it merely slipped away, waiting for another moment to strike? The library was my sanctuary, a place where I could lose myself among the shelves, enveloped by the scent of aged paper and polished wood. I often visited after class, seeking refuge in the dimly lit corners where the world outside faded into a whisper. That afternoon, I settled into my favorite nook on the second floor, a cozy alcove nestled between two towering shelves. The soft glow of the desk lamp cast warm shadows across my notebook, and I began to scribble notes for my upcoming research paper. As I immersed myself in my work, I noticed the library was quieter than usual. The soft rustle of pages turning and the distant sound of the occasional librarian organizing books were the only breaks in the silence. It was soothing, the perfect environment for studying. Yet, a hint of discomfort tugged at my mind, a gnawing sensation that lingered just beyond my awareness. I took a break, stretching my legs and wandering down one of the aisles, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead. I perused the titles, my fingers brushing the spines of books, but something drew my attention further down the row. At the far end, I spotted a figure partially obscured by the shadows. They stood motionless, their gaze directed at the floor, as if studying a particular spot on the carpet. My heart quickened, and I glanced away, pretending to examine a nearby book, but my curiosity compelled me to look again. The figure hadn't moved. They wore dark clothing, their face hidden beneath a hood, and an unsettling stillness surrounded them. It was as if they were waiting for something or someone, their presence creating a ripple of unease in the tranquil atmosphere. I tried to dismiss the sensation and return to my study area, but my mind was distracted. I glanced back toward the figure, who was now standing in the same spot, seemingly oblivious to the world around them. The library felt different now. The quiet that had once comforted me had morphed into something I couldn't define. Determined to shake off the creeping discomfort, I returned to my notes. But every few minutes I caught myself stealing glances at the figure, who remained still as a statue. It was difficult to concentrate. The weight of their presence gnawed at the edges of my thoughts. Each time I looked away, I felt their gaze on me, even if it was unfounded. After what felt like an eternity, I decided to check my watch. The minutes had slipped by and the library was growing emptier. I stood up, stretching again, and made my way toward the window, hoping the fresh view outside would clear my head. But as I glanced back, my breath hitched. The figure had moved. Now they were standing closer, mere shelves away from me, their head tilted slightly as if they were studying my every move. My heart raced as I forced myself to look away, suddenly aware of the pounding of my pulse in my ears. I took a step back, trying to shake off the overwhelming urge to flee. I had to stay calm. Libraries were meant to be safe havens. I made my way to the nearest staircase, hoping to find solace on a different floor. But as I climbed, the feeling of being watched intensified. I could almost sense the figure trailing behind me, their presence shadowing my every step. I quickened my pace, desperate to find refuge in the higher shelves, where the cramped aisles would shield me. Once on the third floor, I wandered into a less frequented section filled with dusty tomes. I breathed a sigh of relief, the old books surrounding me like a protective barrier. I began to read a title that caught my eye, hoping to lose myself in its pages and distract from the discomfort lingering in my mind. But every few moments, I found my thoughts drifting back to the figure. What was their intent? Why had they been watching me? I strained my ears, listening for any sign of their approach, but all I could hear was the faint rustling of paper and the distant hum of the building settling. I felt trapped between the allure of knowledge and the suffocating dread that coiled within me. The minutes stretched into an eternity, and I finally decided it was time to leave. I returned to the staircase, my heart racing as I descended back to the second floor. I turned a corner, ready to bolt for the exit, but froze as I spotted the figure once more. They stood at the foot of the stairs, their body angled slightly as if anticipating my descent. My instincts screamed for me to flee, but the path behind me was blocked. There was nowhere else to go. I could feel the walls closing in, the space feeling narrower as the figure remained unmoving. I took a step back, my breath quickening, and then summoned the courage to make a run for it. As I dashed past them, I felt an electric jolt of fear surge through my body. I didn't look back, focusing solely on the exit ahead. The door loomed like a beacon of safety, and I burst through it, feeling the cool air wash over me. Once outside, I leaned against the wall, gasping for breath, trying to shake the lingering fear that clung to my mind. I dared to glance back at the library, but the windows were now dark, the flickering lights inside extinguished. It was as if the building had swallowed the figure whole, leaving no trace of the encounter. Though I had escaped, a lingering unease settled within me. The figure would haunt my thoughts, a ghostly presence that reminded me that even in the safest of places, shadows could linger just beyond the light. The library that had once been my refuge had transformed into a realm of uncertainty, a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying things are the ones we cannot explain. The cozy coffee shop on the corner of Maple Street was my refuge from the hustle and bustle of everyday life. I loved its rustic charm, the worn wooden tables, the eclectic artwork adorning the walls, and the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee that wrapped around me like a warm embrace. It was a space where time seemed to slow, allowing me to escape into the pages of a good book or focus on my writing. I settled into my usual spot by the window one chilly afternoon, the gentle sound of rain tapping against the glass providing a soothing backdrop. The shop was relatively quiet, with only a few patrons scattered throughout. I ordered my favorite drink, a spiced chai latte, and pulled out my laptop, eager to immerse myself in the world I was creating. As I typed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It was subtle at first, an awareness in the back of my mind that made me glance around the room. Other patrons were engrossed in their own conversations or lost in their phones, but I couldn't shake the sensation. I turned to look out the window, hoping the rain would ground me, but it only intensified the feeling of isolation. Moments later, I caught a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision. I turned my head just in time to see a figure standing near the counter, partially obscured by the steam from the espresso machine. The figure was slender, dressed in an old-fashioned coat, their features indistinct and faded like an old photograph. A strange chill raced down my spine as I instinctively focused on them. For a moment, I thought it might be a trick of the light or my imagination, but as I squinted, the figure appeared more defined, lingering by the barista. There was something almost ethereal about them, a quality that made my breath hitch. I shook my head, trying to dispel the lingering unease and return to my work. But each time I looked up, I found the figure standing closer, their presence somehow magnetic, yet unnerving. I felt as though they were reaching out to me, inviting me to pay attention. I couldn't help but wonder if they were a ghost of sorts, trapped in the space, tied to some past moment that echoed through the walls. I watched as they seemed to shift slightly, their form wavering as if caught in a haze. It was unsettling, and I turned my attention back to my screen, desperately trying to focus. I typed furiously, but every word felt heavy and leaden, each sentence interrupted by the tension coiling around me. As I stole another glance, the figure had moved again, this time standing just a few feet away, as if they were observing me directly. A sudden wave of curiosity washed over me, mingling with the unease. What could they possibly want? I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end, my heart pounding in my chest. The barista called out an order, breaking the spell of silence that had enveloped me. The figure's gaze shifted, and for a fleeting moment I thought they might turn away. But instead, they remained still, their eyes locked onto me with an intensity that sent shivers racing down my spine. I couldn't shake the sense that I was being drawn into something beyond my understanding. With renewed resolve, I closed my laptop and stood up. I needed to confront whatever this was. As I approached the counter, the figure drifted toward the back of the shop, gliding silently between tables. I followed, feeling a mixture of trepidation and intrigue. As I moved deeper into the cafe, I noticed the temperature dropped, and a heavy silence enveloped me. The patrons around me seemed unaware of my pursuit, lost in their own worlds. The figure stopped at a small, secluded table in the corner, and as I drew nearer, I saw that the chair across from them was empty. My heart raced. I could almost feel a magnetic pull drawing me closer, an inexplicable connection that made it impossible to turn back. When I reached the table, the figure turned slightly, and I felt an overwhelming urge to sit down, to connect with this ghostly presence that had captivated me. I hesitated for a moment, searching for a way to rationalize what I was experiencing, but the curiosity was overpowering. I took a seat, my pulse quickening as I stared at the empty chair, feeling a chill wash over me. As I sat there, the figure slowly began to dissolve into the air, their outline blurring and fading like mist in the sunlight. I reached out instinctively, but my hand passed through the space where they had been, the sensation like reaching through water. A sense of loss washed over me, mingling with a deep yearning to understand. Suddenly, the barista approached, her face a mix of concern and curiosity. I blinked, momentarily disoriented, as I looked up at her. The shop was warm and bustling around me, the rain now a gentle patter outside. I turned back to the corner table, but the figure had vanished completely, leaving nothing but the faintest hint of an impression in the air, like a whispered memory. A shiver ran down my spine as I tried to process what had just happened. The barista asked if I was okay, and I nodded, unable to articulate the experience I had just witnessed. I couldn't shake the feeling that the ghost had come to me for a reason, a longing echoing from a time long forgotten. As I resumed my seat, the warmth of the coffee shop enveloped me, yet the presence lingered in the back of my mind. I left the cafe that evening with a lingering sense of wonder, the figure imprinted in my memory. I would return to the coffee shop, drawn back by the mystery that lay within its walls, hoping to catch another glimpse of the ghostly presence that had intertwined itself with my life, forever altering the way I saw that familiar sanctuary. Late nights spent scrolling through social media had become a comforting routine. The blue light from my laptop illuminated my small room, casting shadows against the walls as I indulged in the digital world. I loved connecting with friends, sharing snippets of my life, and exploring the vast landscape of the internet. It felt safe, contained within the pixels of my screen. However, one night, as I logged onto my favorite platform, I noticed an unfamiliar name in my notifications. It was a friend request from someone I didn't recognize. Their profile was minimal. No photos, no personal details, just a generic username followed by a string of numbers. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the accept button. Something about the account sent a shiver down my spine, but curiosity ultimately won out, and I clicked accept. Almost immediately, the user began liking and commenting on my posts. At first, I shrugged it off as harmless enthusiasm. Perhaps they were just another fan or a fellow enthusiast in my niche. They seemed genuinely interested in what I shared, but their comments became increasingly personal, referencing things I hadn't posted online, little snippets of my life that I hadn't shared with anyone. A gnawing anxiety started to bubble up inside me. I brushed it aside, thinking it might be coincidence or an uncanny ability to gather information from my posts. Still, I felt an uncomfortable weight in my chest whenever I saw their name pop up on my notifications. Days turned into weeks, and their attention only intensified. They began sending direct messages, first innocuous questions about my favorite books and music, then delving into deeper territory, asking about my daily routines, my work, and even my friends. Each message sent a jolt of alarm through me, and I started to feel like I was under a microscope. I tightened my privacy settings, but it did little to deter them. They still managed to slip through the cracks, commenting on posts that should have been shielded from prying eyes. I contemplated blocking them, but hesitated, feeling the strange thrill of their attention. I convinced myself that it was harmless, an oddity that I could handle. Then came the night I couldn't ignore the feeling of dread any longer. I was mindlessly scrolling through my feed when I noticed a notification that made my stomach drop. They had tagged me in a post, something I had never shared publicly, a picture of my apartment building taken from a distance. It was unmistakably my home, the brick facade and the small balcony adorned with potted plants. Panic surged through me as I closed my laptop and glanced out the window. The street below was bathed in darkness, the shadows swallowing everything whole. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as I quickly checked the locks on my door, a rush of paranoia settling in. Had they been watching me? How had they known where I lived? I spent the rest of the night tossing and turning, unable to shake the fear that clawed at me. Every sound outside seemed amplified, the rustling of leaves, the distant hum of cars, the echo of my own breath. The idea that someone had been observing me, piecing together details of my life from the digital breadcrumbs I left behind, consumed me. The next morning, I mustered the courage to report the account. The sense of relief that washed over me was short-lived. It felt like a hollow victory. They would just create a new one, I thought. Their fixation would not wane that easily. I took extra precautions, unplugging my devices, changing passwords, and even considering a temporary social media hiatus. Days passed without incident, but my paranoia lingered like a shadow. I found myself glancing over my shoulder whenever I went out, my heart racing at every unfamiliar face. I would scroll through my notifications, half expecting to see a new account emerge from the ether. Then came a message that shattered any semblance of calm I had left. I opened my laptop to see a direct message from the same user, but this time it was different. Instead of their usual inquiries, the message was unsettlingly vague. "I know you're trying to hide, but you can't escape me." A chill raced down my spine, and I felt bile rise in my throat. I reported the message immediately and considered my next steps. I reached out to friends, sharing my experience, seeking support and reassurance. It helped to know I wasn't alone, but the unease still nestled in the back of my mind. One evening, I decided to take a break from the digital realm, craving a moment of peace away from the chaos. I put on my favorite hoodie and ventured out for a walk, hoping the fresh air would soothe my frayed nerves. I strolled through the quiet streets, my mind racing as I tried to shake the ever-looming dread. But as I rounded a corner, my heart sank. There, across the street, stood a figure. Their hood was pulled low, and though I couldn't make out their features, I felt an undeniable sense of recognition. It was the same shadowy outline I had seen in their profile picture, a mere silhouette that seemed to shift and blend with the darkness around it. I froze, paralyzed by fear, my pulse racing as I stood there, rooted in place. The figure remained still, watching me. The realization hit me like a wave, and I felt a cold sweat break out along my spine. I turned on my heel and ran, not stopping until I reached the safety of my apartment. Once inside, I locked the door and leaned against it, my heart pounding in my chest. I quickly pulled out my phone, my hands trembling as I dialed a friend. I needed someone to tell me it was going to be okay, that I wasn't losing my mind. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty and anxiety. I rarely left my apartment, isolating myself in fear of encountering that figure again. I remained glued to my phone, anticipating another message, another unsettling notification that would pull me back into the nightmare. Then came the final straw. One evening, while scrolling through my feed, I noticed a familiar post, a photo of me walking down the street taken from a distance. It was innocent enough, just a candid shot of me enjoying the evening, but it had been posted by the same user. My heart dropped as I realized they were closer than I thought. In that moment, I made a decision. I packed a bag and left my apartment, staying with a friend until I could find a new place. I cut ties with social media entirely, erasing the digital presence I had built over the years. It was a radical move, but I craved the safety that came with anonymity. Eventually, I settled into a new life, far from the shadows of my past. I learned to navigate the world differently, always cautious and aware. The online stalker became a ghost of a memory, but I knew the fear would always linger just beneath the surface, a reminder that sometimes the darkness isn't confined to the offline world. It can seep through the screens we trust, haunting us in ways we never anticipated. The quaint hotel sat on the outskirts of town, its vintage architecture exuding a charm that drew me in. I had planned a weekend getaway to escape the chaos of everyday life, eager to unwind in the serenity of the countryside. Upon arrival, I was greeted by the soft glow of antique lamps and the warm scent of polished wood. The lobby was quiet, the kind of stillness that enveloped you in a comforting embrace. After checking in, I took the ornate staircase to my room on the second floor, my suitcase rolling behind me on the worn carpet. The hallway was dimly lit, lined with faded photographs that hinted at the hotel's storied past. I paused at my door, a heavy wooden piece with an intricate design, and inserted the old-fashioned key. As it turned in the lock, I felt a strange twinge of excitement mixed with unease, but I pushed it aside as I stepped inside. The room was cozy, furnished with a plush bed draped in floral patterns, a small writing desk, and a window that overlooked the sprawling gardens. I dropped my bag by the bed and took a moment to soak in the ambiance. It felt like stepping back in time, a world away from modern distractions. After unpacking, I decided to explore the hotel. The creaking floorboards accompanied me as I wandered the hallways, discovering various nooks filled with vintage furniture and memorabilia. A library tucked away in a corner caught my eye, its shelves lined with dust-covered books and a faint scent of leather. I spent some time thumbing through the pages, the quiet enveloping me like a warm blanket. As evening approached, I made my way back to my room. I paused in front of a large mirror hanging on the wall, its ornate frame glinting in the low light. For a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a shadow shift behind me, but when I turned, there was nothing there. A shiver danced down my spine, but I brushed it aside as a trick of the light. Later that night, I settled into bed, the soft rustle of the sheets a comforting sound. The quiet of the hotel enveloped me, and I drifted off into a deep sleep, the exhaustion of travel weighing heavily on my eyelids. But I awoke suddenly, a feeling of unease pulling me from my dreams. The room was dark, the only sound the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. I lay still, listening intently, my heart pounding as I strained to hear anything out of the ordinary. Then I heard it, a soft whispering, barely audible, like the rustling of leaves outside my window. I froze, every nerve in my body on high alert. The whispers seemed to echo through the walls, weaving in and out of my consciousness. I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake off the remnants of sleep, but the whispers only grew louder. I sat up, the sheets slipping from my body as I peered into the darkness. I reached for my phone to check the time, but it had mysteriously turned off. A sense of dread settled over me as I swung my legs over the side of the bed. Tentatively, I made my way to the door, each step heavy with apprehension. I opened it slowly, peering out into the hallway. It was empty, the soft glow of the wall sconces casting flickering shadows. I stepped out, guided by the whispers that seemed to beckon me forward, a strange compulsion urging me to follow. As I walked down the corridor, the whispers grew clearer, yet I couldn't make out any distinct words. They felt like an invitation, a haunting melody that drew me deeper into the hotel's bowels. The unsettling atmosphere wrapped around me, but I pressed on, curiosity battling my instinct to turn back. I turned a corner and stumbled upon a small door tucked away behind an overgrown potted plant. It was ajar, a sliver of darkness spilling out into the hallway. The whispers intensified, a chorus that resonated in my bones. I felt drawn to the door, compelled to see what lay beyond. Taking a deep breath, I pushed it open. The room was dimly lit, filled with old furniture draped in dust-covered sheets. The whispers faded into an eerie silence as I stepped inside. The room felt almost alive, as if it held the weight of secrets and stories long forgotten. In the corner, a large mirror caught my eye, the surface clouded with age. As I approached, a chill ran through me. I caught my reflection, but something else shimmered just behind me. I spun around, heart racing, but found only the empty room. My gaze returned to the mirror, and I froze. In the reflection, I could see the outlines of figures standing just outside the frame, their forms indistinct, almost transparent. Panic surged through me as I realized they weren't just figments of my imagination. They were trapped in the glass, lost souls whose whispers had called to me. I stumbled back, a surge of terror coursing through me. I needed to escape. I bolted for the door, but the whispers erupted into a cacophony echoing in my ears. The shadows seemed to stretch toward me, reaching out with phantom hands as if trying to pull me into their realm. I burst back into the hallway, slamming the door behind me. My heart raced, and I dashed toward the staircase, my footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. I stumbled down the stairs, breathless and frantic, the whispers still ringing in my ears. I reached the lobby, the glow of the lamps casting long shadows across the room. The receptionist was gone, leaving the space eerily quiet. I made for the front door, desperate to escape the confines of the hotel, but as I reached for the handle, it wouldn't budge. Panic set in as I pulled harder, but the door remained locked tight. I spun around, my breath coming in quick gasps. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to twist and writhe, and the whispers returned, swirling around me like a tempest. I felt the weight of unseen eyes upon me, the shadows stretching and closing in, leaving no escape. With a final burst of adrenaline, I turned and ran back toward the staircase, my heart pounding as I ascended to the second floor. I dashed down the hallway, throwing open doors in a desperate search for a way out. Each room was filled with remnants of the past, dusty furniture, forgotten belongings, echoing the lives that had once inhabited the hotel. Finally, I stumbled upon a fire escape at the end of the corridor. I pushed through the door, relief flooding my senses as I stepped onto the metal landing. I hurried down the rickety stairs, the sounds of the whispers fading behind me as I reached the ground floor. I burst out into the cool night air, the moonlight illuminating the path ahead. I didn't look back as I fled the hotel grounds, my heart racing with the memory of the lost souls trapped within its walls. I drove away from the hotel, the shadows receding in my rearview mirror, but the lingering whispers would forever haunt my thoughts. I left behind the quaint charm of that old building, knowing I had narrowly escaped a place steeped in darkness, a hotel harboring secrets that should never have been disturbed.